Welcome, Steve.
Thanks for having me. Just before I start, if you're interested in what I have to say today, the book that I've got up here, Drugs 2.0 by Mike Powers, who I'm going to talk to a little bit further. He's a UK journalist. Great book to read. I have no vested interest in the book. I've got no shares in the company, but I highly recommend reading it. So when we're talking about new and emerging drugs, what's in a name? Because they're often referred to by various names. I tend to refer to these as new and emerging substances or novel psychoactive substances, but they do get called legal highs, and I think that can be problematic because what's contained in the products may or may not be legal depending on the jurisdiction you're in or legal changes that have been made, and it's for the buyer to beware. And in addition to that, one of the problems by calling them legal drugs is that it increases the perception of their safety, and we know that they're not safe. One term that really bugs me is calling them synthetics. For example, there was the recent incident in Queensland, and it's been reported that people had taken synthetic LSD. LSD is a synthetic drug, so how can you have a synthetic drug? That doesn't make any sense to me. But further to that, what it does is it plays on the logical fallacy that we all engage in, which is that we somehow believe that natural substances are somehow less dangerous than synthetic substances. So the media love to use the term synthetics because it ramps up the moral panic. So I prefer the term, I prefer the term new and emerging or novel psychoactives. So where's all this come from? Well, David Caldecott from the ACT starts us off with some very optimistic, some optimistic etiology with this vortex of doom. So basically there's been new compounds developed that fall outside of current drug laws. The law finally catches up. New drug compounds are then developed that fall outside of the law. This circle, this merry-go-round ride is speeding up faster and faster. And what in turn we are seeing is young people increasingly exposed to a growing number of compounds that have never been seen before. In addition to that, you've got the Iron Law of Prohibition. What this means is when a substance is prohibited, people will want to try to get the most active version of the drug is in question because it's easy to get it across borders. An example is when alcohol was banned in the US, were they brewing beer or moonshine? They were brewing moonshine because you could get it across the borders easier. And we're seeing this in terms of new fentanyl analogues being sold as heroin, and many other instances of the Iron Law of Prohibition. Another example of the Iron Law of Prohibition is when you went to your Year 12 formal, did you take a hip flask or did you strap a six-pack to your leg? No, you took the hip flask. So the problem of the Iron Law of Prohibition is what we're ending up with now is very potent psychoactive substances that are active at sub-milligram dosage ranges, which is a real worry. And so these young people that are taking these products are really lab rats. They are taking the drugs before the drugs have been tested on animals, and quite often we test them on the animals after we've identified that there's an issue out there. So just to give you an indication of the problem of the situation, you can see there's this exponential increase in the number of new drugs being identified by the European Monitoring Centre. 2014 was a record year where they identified 101 drugs. 2015, 100 drugs. I've got a +1 there because I've got a little story to tell. And my little story is about Mike. Mike, as a journalist, was interested in seeing if he could create a legal high. So he approached one of his friends who was a PhD student in pharmacology, and his mate said, yeah, this will be too easy. We'll start with this compound called famotidine, which is an old school diet pill. was banned in the 1960s because it had some very euphoric effects, as you can see by the Fab Four there, holding their vials of promethazine, looking quite pleased with themselves. And his mate said, we'll just tweak the molecule a little bit, we'll add a chlorine atom, we'll add a methyl group, and that will fall outside of the current laws in the UK. So Mike put an ad online asking for vendors. He was posing as a chemist in the UK, put an ad online asking if there would be a chemical manufacturer interested in making a small quantity of this product for the research that he was doing at his pharmaceutical laboratory. Well, within days he had a number of responses, and so they were primarily coming from India and China, and so he engaged with one of the vendors. They made a transaction using Western Union, so there would be no trace of the transaction taking place. A couple of days later he was emailed. They said to him, do you want us to post it to you inside a book? He wrote back and said, why would I want you to post it inside a book? I'm from a pharmaceutical company. Why don't you just put it in a FedEx Express package with a material data safety sheet like you would normally to a pharmaceutical company? Obviously the people in India and China knew what he was up to. They know what's going on. And you can see the bag here that arrived a couple of days later through Express Post, FedEx. And there's his 10 milligrams of promethazine, which he purchased for about €100, I think. He had the drug tested at a laboratory. They determined that it was the drug that he'd requested. It was 99.99% pure. They did some computer modelling, and it indicated that it would have an amphetamine-like effect. And at this point, Mike had a couple of options. He could write a news story about it. He could package it up as a legal high and make some cash. He could test it on himself and see if it really did have an amphetamine-like effect. He said he went with the former, but we can only assume what he did with the product. So in terms of novel psychoactive substances in Australia, you've got these three groups that I'm going to talk to. People that are using the research chemicals, buying them directly, people that are using legal highs. And the biggest concern for me though is the unintentional users, but I'll start off by talking about the legal highs. So in Australia, primarily what we've got now is synthetic cannabis products. The pills and powders, these are some older pictures where they were selling bar salt, synthetic cannabis and ecstasy-like pills, have kind of dissipated from the market. But what in turn has happened is these research chemicals that are contained in these products are entering the illicit market, and I'm going to talk to that a little bit more further in my presentation. So synthetic cannabis has been around for a while. It emerged in a product called Spice in the UK in 2005, and it took them until 2009 to identify exactly what was in it. And they identified that it contained synthetic cannabinoid agonists, and in particular one of them was JWH-018. And being structurally dissimilar from THC, it was considered a legal chemical, but because it was similar in structure to THC, it had the same effect as THC at the CB1 receptor site, working as an agonist. So it worked the same way in the brain as THC does. Didn't really hit Australia until 2011 when chronic emerged as a drug of concern. What happened was that some miners were ringing up Triple J saying they were smoking this wicked product called chronic, getting stoned off their face, and it wasn't coming up in drug tests. You can imagine that took off in the media pretty quickly. It was being produced in New Zealand at the time and imported into Australia. Looking at the chronic products, my colleague Monica Barrett did a survey of people that were smoking chronic, and she found that there were some adverse effects that people were experiencing, but nothing too serious, and only one person in her sample sought emergency medical attention. So in response to all of this media panic and uproar around this legal cannabis being used in WA, the WA government was the first to ban 7 synthetic cannabinoid agonists, including JWH-018, because they believed that these were some of the products that were contained in chronic. Well, chronic couldn't have asked for better advertising, really. So this is from my research from the International Journal of Drug Policy, and the bottom line shows the number of news stories coming out at the time, and at the top line is the number of people searching Google to buy chronic. So you can see there's sort of a one-to-one relationship there. And the A point is the point when the WA government first announced that they were going to ban the products. And you can see that's when you start to see the spike in people getting really interested in purchasing chronic products. I don't have a screenshot, but one of my favourite stories I saw was on the Sydney Morning Herald, where they had they had the story, chronic's going to be banned in Perth in 7 days, and on the side there was a Google ad for the chronic store. So you could click on that, take you straight to the chronic store where you could purchase your chronic before it was banned. It wasn't very effective. This group took 3 days just to make a stronger blend. Being June, July, they thought they'd have it in a financial year sale. Chronic released its black label edition, especially for its WA customers, and of course this contained new chemicals similar to JWH, just slightly tweaked. One concern with these new chemicals were that this particular one, it contains a fluorine atom, and in turn that may increase its neurotoxicity. So this is just a summary of the legislative actions that we've seen since then. There's been over 40 legislative changes made at the state and federal level. In WA, they had another ban, because on the front page of the West Australian newspaper there was a story about a man with a pre-existing heart condition who had a heart attack. Would normally be on the front page of the West Australian, but it was alleged that he was smoking black label chronic at the time. So 40 legislative changes made. How effective has this been? Well, not very. All we've seen is new chemicals entering the market, and they're starting to get more concerning, more chemicals containing fluorine atoms, and this really weird chemical URB 597, which has not been identified in Australia, but it has been found in synthetic cannabis products in Japan and the US. And what's really cool about that particular chemical is it's not a synthetic cannabinoid agonist. It's an endocannabinoid reuptake inhibitor. So people that are smoking this particular product containing this particular chemical, they're not actually getting high on the chemical itself, but by preventing the reuptake of endocannabinoids, the natural cannabinoids in the person's brain, they're getting high on their own brain chemistry. Good way of, I mean, the science behind it is amazing. There's some very clever people that are working on this stuff. It would be nice if they would put their knowledge and skills to some more useful efforts. Chronic actually left the market at this point. They said, we can't keep up with Australia, the laws are changing every week, and so they exited the market. But what we then saw was new local products that were badged as chronic, because chronic became known as synthetic cannabis in the same way we talk about it, Biro as a pen. It was the brand. I particularly like the chronic on your left-hand side. You'd go to the iChronic website and they guarantee home delivery within 45 minutes. So, in 2013, we saw the case of Marley. The Office of Health issued a warning. Several people died from smoking Marley, and a number of people were admitted to hospital. So we identified what chemicals were in it, and as you can see, they're getting, there's these more really weird chemicals that are moving further and further away from this original chemical JWH, which we started with. When these chemicals were administered to rats, they didn't show a high level of toxicity, which then led us to ask, well, what's going on here? These people are coming in with renal failure, but when we give the chemical to rats, it's not causing the same problems. So it's not the chemicals that are at fault here. what was going on, is hypothesised, is that the people were experiencing nitrate poisoning. It was through bad manufacture of the product. When Chronic was doing its job, they were producing the product in quite a sterile environment. They were doing it quite well. When we moved to clandestine manufacture in Australia, it hasn't been done so well. And so the solvents that were used to dissolve the chemical that was in Mali was not properly evaporated off. And so these unfortunate consumers had been inhaling the solvent as well as the chemical, and it was the solvent causing the nitrate poisoning that was leading to the renal failure. So this is from the Global Drug Survey data 2016, and the blue line shows the percentage of people who reported buying legal highs in the last 12 months, and you can see that it's decreasing. The dark blue is that percentage who sought medical attention in the last 12 months due to using legal highs. It's increasing. What we think is going on is that the word on the street is these products are not very good, they make you feel very sick, and don't use them. And clearly we can see that they are causing more and more harm, more emergency medical attention. I think one of the problems in the dual diagnosis space is that some of these messages aren't being passed on to people with severe psychiatric disorders, and we're still seeing a lot of people with severe psychiatric disorders smoking synthetic cannabis, whereas when you look at the general population, the numbers are coming down quite rapidly. So synthetic cannabis withdrawal. It's a little more complex than cannabis withdrawal because, well, what chemical have they been smoking? There's hundreds of them out there. So how do you determine what you're going to do? It's a bit like Russian roulette, really. Spin the wheel and what we do know is that it tends to be more acute and severe than natural cannabis, so that cannabis withdrawal scale scores peak at 2 days compared to cannabis at 7 to 10 days. So that gives you a graphical representation of what that might look like. And so you see this severe and acute onset of withdrawal that tends to start dissipating, unlike cannabis, which doesn't peak until around day 8. There's a phenomenological study of 6 people who are dependent on synthetic cannabis. It's got known to contain 5F8KB48, but there was no confirmatory analysis of that. That was just what was sort of word on the street at the time. But just some quotes from these people. One was the symptoms that they were reporting when they tried to cease using included symptoms of nausea, sweats, racing heart rate, being emotionally labile, agitated, and some direct quotes. Every 2 to 3 hours, it's like a routine. If you told me I'd be dead tomorrow from it, I still wouldn't give it up. I would do it on my own. It just gets a bit hard. It just gets a bit much. And so I guess what this highlights is that when we're talking about synthetic cannabis withdrawal, consider the possibility of an inpatient withdrawal. A study conducted in New Zealand in which they did a file review of patients found that 53% of people seeking treatment for synthetic cannabis in the community, it was deemed necessary for them to have an inpatient withdrawal. In terms of acute settings, the treatment recommendations are similar to cannabis. So in an acute setting, treat the symptoms as they emerge, so benzodiazepines for anxiety. If this isn't working, then maybe considering the use of an atypical antipsychotic. For most people, symptoms will resolve spontaneously. However, people with previously diagnosed psychotic disorders, symptoms may not resolve as quickly, and I've heard reports of symptoms, people experiencing symptoms of psychosis for 3 to 4 weeks afterwards. So there's no specific treatments developed for chronic use. Why the pun? So treat symptomatically and treat the and using similar psychosocial treatments that we would for cannabis. So who's most likely to use synthetic cannabis given all these unpleasant side effects? Based on the Australian punters in the Global Drug Survey, 80% were male. We've got a median age of 23, which is much younger than the median age of the people who were smoking the original chronic, much higher rates of unemployment, and 99% reporting smoking natural cannabis. More importantly though, 93 said they preferred to smoke natural cannabis anyway. So, of those who preferred it to natural cannabis, why did they prefer it? They preferred the intense effects that they were getting from synthetic cannabis at short duration. Some of them said that it was more easily available, and having worked in the Frankston Mornington Peninsula region, and I suspect in other regional areas, it may be difficult to get access cannabis, particularly if you've recently moved into the area, but you can go down to the local tobacconist or your sex store and pick it up. And 15% were using it to avoid urine screens. So that's a key demand for synthetic cannabis, is avoiding urine screens. So we've talked about legal highs. Just very briefly talking about research chemicals, I've got two examples here. One is methoxetamine. Methoxetamine was developed specifically to work better than ketamine as a recreational drug. One of the problems with ketamine is it's not orally active, so you have to snort it or inject it, and its effects wear off after about 30-40 minutes. Methoxetamine, on the other hand, is orally active, and its effects can last up to 3 to 4 hours. The only problem with methoxetamine is that it's active at a much lower dose than ketamine is. So whereas people might have 100, 200 milligrams of ketamine, the equivalent would be 30 milligrams of methoxetamine, which is fine if you know you've got methoxetamine, but if you think you've been sold ketamine, you could be in a world of trouble. And what's happened in this case that's reported from the Canberra Times, with David Caldecott pictured there, is that they were sold it as ketamine, and unfortunately it has a longer duration of onset. So when you snort a line of ketamine, the effects come on after 5 or 10 minutes. When you snort methoxetamine, the effects take 40 minutes to come on. So they racked up a couple of lines, not much happening, this must be pretty shit ketamine, racked up a few more lines, not much happening, shit ketamine, racked up a few more lines, and pretty soon it all started kicking in, and they had to be taken to hospital. The other drug that's been in the news recently again is the Embomi series. So Embomi was developed in a laboratory in the US specifically to understand the serotonin receptor responsible for providing hallucinations. So it's a pure agonist of that particular receptor site. Somebody must have read one of the papers that was published about this drug, synthesised it, tested it out on themselves or some poor unwilling victim, and they found that it had some strong hallucinogenic effects, and consequently what we've seen is that it's been sold as LSD, and we've had a number of deaths in Australia, and most recently 2 weekends ago from this particular drug. The problem with Embomi is, unlike LSD has low acute toxicity. You can take a lot of LSD and have a pretty hard time mentally, but it's not hard on the body. There's a case study reported from the 1970s where there were a couple of people that went around their mate's house in the US. They knocked on the door, it was ajar, they let themselves in. They saw a coffee table, on the coffee table was a bag of white powder. Being the 70s, they thought it was cocaine, so they thought they'd help themselves to it. Racked up a few lines. Unfortunately, it was pure LSD, and they took somewhere between 10,000 and 100,000 doses of LSD each. They were taken to hospital in a mentally unstable condition, but discharged 24 hours later without any physiological, any long-lasting physiological problems. If these people had have taken Embomi, they would have been dead, because the threshold between an active dose of Embomi and a lethal dose is quite small because the structure of it is similar to that of amphetamine, and so what you start to see is cardiovascular problems, overheating, leading to rhabdomyolysis and all other kinds of really nasty problems. So the issue we have now is that all of these research chemicals are turning up in the traditional illicit market. And so I've already given you the example of ketamine, methoxetamine being sold as that. With MDMA, there are just a plethora of drugs that could be sold as MDMA, including PMA, which is a particularly nasty one because it takes about 2 hours for onset. And so again, a bit like methoxetamine, the problem is people take a pill, 40 minutes later, not much is going on, so they take 4 more, it all kicks in, and they end up with some severe cardiovascular problems. And if they don't make it to hospital in time, they die. And there's been a number of deaths from PMA in Australia. In LSD, I've mentioned N-Bomi, but probably what's coming is the fentanyl analogues being sold as heroin. So acetylfentanyl is 10 times stronger than heroin, and it's available in Australia at the moment. There's MT41, which was being researched as a pharmaceutical, but it was associated with hearing loss, so they abandoned that research. There's 4-FIBF, which is another fentanyl analogue. I'm going to talk to that a little bit more. U4770, which was actually found in the autopsy results of Prince. It's believed he took some counterfeit pills, some counterfeit Vicodin or some counterfeit oxycodone, and the counterfeit pills didn't have the oxycodone in them. What they had was U47700. W18 has been reported to be up to 10,000 times more potent than morphine, though subsequent testing has revealed that this is probably not true. The real drug of concern is carfentanil, and this is turning up in the US all over the place at the moment. And when people are coming into emergency departments, they're requiring 10 milligrams up to 20 milligrams of naloxone, just to start reversing some of the respiratory depression, because carfentanil is an approved drug to take down elephants. It's something like 100 times more potent than fentanyl. And there's been some anecdotal evidence that it's turning up in Australia. I haven't got empirical evidence, but just some anecdotal evidence. This really worries me. So we probably don't have this issue in Australia, but as you can see in the US, they've seen a massive spike in fentanyl turning up in counterfeit pills, and this is probably related to the fact that medication costs a lot more in the US, so people look for alternative sources. But it is something to keep an eye on, the fact that we're seeing fentanyl. Other things that scare the shit out of me are the fact that you can buy half a gram of alprazolam, otherwise known as Xanax, from Australia to Australia, express post, 2 days, $250. That's on the dark web. I'm going to talk to that in a moment. But you want to have some pretty accurate scales if you're buying half a gram of alprazolam, or you're going to find yourself going for having a very long sleep that you may not wake up from. Just to keep highlighting this issue with unintentional use, is the number of people presenting at New South Wales hospitals from ecstasy has almost doubled in the past 6 years. And this is related to this unintentional use of research chemicals being contained in their pills. So as a clinician, what does this mean? It means that when you're doing assessments, the primary drug of choice that the person is presenting for may not be the one that's actually going to kill them. So it's important to have conversations around other drugs that the person is using. Often, you might ask, you go through the assessment, you ask about ecstasy, but don't have much of a conversation about it. Given what we're seeing and the increased number of deaths associated with ecstasy and N-Bomi ending up in ecstasy, these are conversations we need to be having. And the person's primary drug of choice may contain new and novel chemicals that could cause them a great deal of harm. And so we need to be having conversations to people about these new and emerging adulterants such as carfentanil, so that they are aware that they may be ingesting these. And I guess it just goes back to basic harm reduction in terms of people when they're using a new batch. They need to be aware of, they need to have a taste of it before having a full dose in case they have purchased carfentanil or one of these other fentanyl analogues. So we can do psychoeducation. It hasn't worked very well for us so far. I prefer that. Great site, Erowid. Erowid is a not-for-profit organisation based in the US. It's non-government based, and all the information contained on it is peer-reviewed by physicians, toxicologists, psychiatrists, psychologists. I'm actually a member of Erowid, so I guess I do have a vested interest in promoting it, but it's a fantastic site, no matter where you're working, and it's also a great site to put consumers onto to get information about drugs, because unlike mdma.gov.au, they talk about the positive, the negative, and the neutral effects. So they provide credible information, and people see it as credible because it's not coming from the government. So this is I don't know if I've updated this. Yes, I have. So this is their psychochemical vault. So you can see that they've got a list of chemicals you get information from: acetylfentanyl, alcohol, alpha PVP, which was termed flakka. We've heard about that recently. I'll keep moving through. DET, DOP, TDMT, DOB, DOC, DOI, DOM, DPT, DXM. There are lots of chemicals out there now, and this is a great spot to get information about them. So I've just clicked on the MDMA vault because I've been talking a little bit about the adulterants that have been coming up in MDMA, and we've had the recent events on the Gold Coast. And so you can see it gives you information about the basics, effects, and realistic health effects, not stuff that's been over-sensationalised. So if I click on the, I think I'm not sure if I click dosage. Yeah, this is duration of effect. So they've actually got peer-reviewed data indicating different dosages, gives people an idea of how long it's going to last, after effects, hangover effects. And you won't be able to read this, but you can just see there's positive effects: mild to extreme mood lift, euphoria, increased willingness to communicate, increase in energy, all of the things that people use MDMA for. They do include the negative effects though, which is what you'll read on the mdma.gov.au, which is, well, maybe not, inappropriate or unintended emotional bonding. Tendency to say things that you might feel uncomfortable about later. Mild to extreme jaw clenching, difficulty concentrating, short-term memory scrambling, muscle tension. So it gives people a balanced approach to education, so I highly recommend Erowid. In terms of harm reduction for new and emerging substances, pill testing, we don't have it until we get it. The best thing we've got is reagent test kits. eztest.com or .org.au.com.au. You can buy reagent test kits, and you can test your pills, you can test your powders, and it'll give you some idea of what might be in it. It won't tell you how much is in it, so I won't tell you, that it's got 200 milligrams of MDMA in the pill or 100 milligrams of MDMA in the pill, but it will tell you if it's got PMA in the pill, which is really handy information. And most people say that, if it turns the colour of PMA, they just flush their pills down the toilet. Another handy tip is to not be the first person in your group to use. In every group there's a guy called Johnny. And Johnny's man. Johnny's a little crazy. Johnny will do anything. Let Johnny try the drugs first. Keep an eye on him for the next half an hour to 45 minutes or even 2 hours. If he starts turning purple, take him to the emergency department. If he's looking like he's having a good time, then maybe you might like to indulge. But don't be the first person in your group to use. When you're using a new batch, starting off small, taking a quarter of a dose, given what I've talked about with MXC and PMA, waiting a long period of time before redosing. Most of these are common sense things. You know, don't play with knives while you're under the influence of drugs. Always a good tip. In acute settings, managing some of these presentations, you're seeing ataxia, tachycardia, arrhythmia, hypertension, hypothermia, rhabdomyolysis, kidney failure, nausea, anxiety, agitation, confusion, and paranoia. Assessment is not going to do you a lot of good in terms of lab results because these new chemicals aren't going to come up in lab results. So what you need to look at is the clinical presentation and very careful questioning, and hopefully you've got a friend who might be able to tell you, give you some more information on what the person's taken. Treatment, similar to the prototypical drug, if you know what the prototypical drug is that it's mimicking, but if you don't know what it is, then basically what you're doing is treating symptomatically. So if the person is experiencing if the person is in hypothermia, aggressive cooling, if they're psychotic, use antipsychotics. If they've got tachycardia, using benzos. Beta blockers are contraindicated because it has a paradoxical effect, giving them some IV saline. So moving to the new dark web. This is a representation of what the internet looks like. So we've got the surface web, which is Google, Wikipedia, all of those things we normally use. Underneath that is the deep web. This is stuff that's on the web, but you can't get to it unless you have access. So an example of that would be peer-reviewed papers, where you need to go through libraries, you need to have subscriptions to be able to get that information. And lying underneath that is the dark web. And the dark web can only be accessed through certain browsers such as Tor, which are designed to ensure anonymity. And there's all kinds of interesting things on the dark web. So, including darknet markets, and the way the Tor network works is somewhat similar to a virtual private network. Except instead of going through one computer, you go through multiple computers before you come out at an exit node. What's really interesting is if you download Tor, which is a hacked version of Firefox, and you go onto Google, you'll find out where you've come out because everything will be in French or Dutch. And it's the only way that you can access these crypto marketplaces where anonymous currency such as Bitcoin is used. I'm not going to go through this slide too much. It's basically the same as eBay. One thing that's different though is when you purchase an order, the money goes into an escrow account that neither party, the vendor nor the buyer, can touch until the purchase arrives, and then you release the money to the seller, to the vendor. And then you can give them some feedback as well, which puts the buyer in a significant amount of power because the vendors are vying for each other's business on this market, and so they're engaging in all kinds of typical strategies, marketing strategies. You know, buy one get one free. There's conflict-free heroin. Don't know how that's been confirmed. I'm trying to think of the cocaine. A great example was you buy a gram of methamphetamine and it comes with free 10 diazepam to come down. So this is a screenshot of a deep web marketplace. This is Alpha Bay, and I'm going into heroin just to give you an idea of what's available in Australia in heroin. So you can buy 2 points of heroin for 40 US. Some increased half a gram for 80 US. Keep moving through this. What I'm really interested in though, given what I'm talking about, is the Phenyl Analogues, and so I've just clicked on fentanyl and other research chemicals, and you can see that fentanyl, you can get 2 milligram injections for $50 or 500 microgram blotter tabs. You can get 5 of those for $55. But looking at some of these analogues, there's a lot of this 4-FIBF that I mentioned earlier. A phenyl analog stronger than fentanyl, 150 times the strength of heroin. So this guy, Etizaman, he sounds pretty good. So I clicked on his ad, and you can see his profile. He's got a VDDI level of 1. You can see he's got lots of positive feedback, which is good. Looks like a good person to buy off. Specifically, these feedback, very nice. This is the real deal. Use fentanyl all the time. This is a lot cheaper. Awesome vendor product, 5 out of 5. Don't hesitate with it. Tizzlam, one of the best vendors here. Very quick to respond the next day. Next day delivery and effing strong stuff. We need to be really careful with this. It's not a joke. Fast, professional and helpful vendor. Great product. Thank you. Here's the actual ad. Stop wasting money on heroin. 40 milligrams of this fentanyl analog. Strong as fentanyl, 150 times the strength of heroin, including duration time. So this would give you, 150 would give you 1 day pure H. This means that this 50 milligrams will last you 3 weeks if used properly, and it's going to cost you $114 US. That's all very good if you're going to use that for yourself. But if you're a little unscrupulous, you might import that and cut it into 3 weeks worth of heroin and sell it at much greater value. Just some basic resources. Twitter, I'd highly recommend people use Twitter. We get so many newsletters, so much emails. With Twitter, you can actually set it up to create your own news page, really, to find out what's going on. And I've just got some examples of some people to follow on Twitter. And I'll finish by just highlighting a resource that was produced in 2013, a little bit of self-promotion, but it is really designed for people working in all kinds of areas, so mental health, allied health, youth workers, etc. Thank you.